Welcome to the Peak of Geek, where we've hit the top but with no plans to stop. You know, when I was growing up in the 90s, the one thing that you could not avoid was dinosaurs. You could blame 1993's Jurassic Park from director Steven Spielberg for kicking off the dinosaur craze, but I think everyone always thought they were awesome. But after a somewhat disappointing sequel with The Lost World Jurassic Park in 1997, the very next year a different giant dinosaur-like creature would hit the big screen, kicking off a personal fascination with watching giant monsters in shock and awe. But let's not kid ourselves. Roland Emmerich's Godzilla from 1998 is not only a terrible Americanized take on a legendary Japanese monster, but it's also a terrible movie-watching experience. Way before Americans got their claws into Japan's iconic monster, he had a somewhat troubling beginning. In Japan, he's known as Gojira, which comes from combining the Japanese words for gorilla and whale. But during development of his 1954 debut film, he was almost a giant octopus. Luckily, even in the 50s, everyone knew dinosaurs were awesome. However, Gojira wasn't originally created to be a fun city-stomping menace who sometimes acts as a villain, but also a reluctant hero who battles other giant monsters. As the first official kaiju movie, a word referring to Japanese creatures and monsters from legends and folklore, the title character actually originates from a much more somber place. A few months before that first movie went into production, a Japanese fishing boat was showered by an American hydrogen bomb test, injuring the crew and contaminating the fish. This incident led to a real anti-nuclear movement and was directly referenced in Gojira. But in the movie's fictional version of events, the hydrogen bomb test led to the awakening of a giant sea creature. At least in his early days, Godzilla represented more than the spectacle of giant monsters battling it out for our collective viewing pleasure. He was, and in many ways still is, a powerful and accurate metaphor for horrible real-life atrocities. The movie itself was also inspired by 1933's King Kong, which had been reissued to great financial success in 1952, along with 1953's The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms, an often forgotten sci-fi horror film based on a short story by Ray Bradbury. In fact, before it was known as Gojira, the previous title was The Giant Monster from 20,000 Miles Beneath the Sea, a pretty obvious nod to the American film. However, the film's title soon shortened to Project G for Giant, before retitling completely to Gojira. While Gojira was directly inspired by King Kong at the conceptual level, director Ishiro Honda purposefully took a very serious approach to this first film. When compared to King Kong, those moments of cinematic adventure and excitement in the Giant Ape movie were nowhere to be found in Godzilla. What we're left with is a very serious and oftentimes bleak film that's more about the human drama than the giant monster. When it comes to special effects, the team originally wanted to replicate the stop-motion animation style found throughout King Kong, but soon realized it would have taken way too much time. Instead, special effects designer Eiji Tsuburaya made the revolutionary decision to create the effects with a monster suit and miniature sets. Unfortunately for Haruo Nakajima, the man inside the Godzilla suit, that first costume was reportedly created from ready-mixed concrete and special plastics, weighing a combined total of almost 100 kilograms. Famously, Nakajima could only be in this heavy suit for 3 minutes before he needed a break, or he would pass out from sheer exhaustion. But Nakajima persevered, and he would go on to portray Godzilla and several other awe-inspiring monsters until his eventual retirement in 1972. Plot-wise, the original Gojira focuses less on the monster's destruction and more on the effects of the Japanese citizens. There are many slow panning shots showing the aftermath of the devastation, echoing real-life tragedies and hopelessness. Interestingly, there's a lot of discussion in the movie about whether to destroy or study Gojira. But after the military decide to unload everything they have on the giant beast, but to no avail, leading Lady Amiko confesses that a doctor named Serizawa has accidentally discovered a weapon called an oxygen destroyer that could end the menace once and for all. At first, Serizawa's hesitant to help, since he's afraid of what will happen to this weapon once it's made public, but ultimately changes his mind after burning his original research. While Gojira's reign of terror does eventually end, the movie leaves us on a thought-provoking note, with one character stating that, if bomb testing continues, another Gojira may awaken in the future. When Godzilla hit theaters in Japan, It set a record for highest first-day ticket sales in Tokyo, and Toho CEO even called director Ishiro Honda to personally congratulate him. Critically, however, reviews were mixed. Some Japanese critics wrote the film off as capitalizing on and exploiting what had happened in Japan in the 1940s. However, hearts and minds would soon change a few years later when Gojira was released in America as Godzilla, King of the Monsters. In the 1956 re-edit, a new character named Steve Martin, no, not that one, could you imagine? No, this is an American reporter played by fellow Canadian Raymond Burr, who happens to stop by Japan in the middle of the Godzilla incident. He's hilariously inserted into scenes throughout this Americanized version to narrate to the audience what's going on. I guess instead of adding subtitles or dubbing everything into English, this was an interesting approach to take, even if the summary translations are often inaccurate. Nowadays, it's a bit hard to take this movie seriously. Whenever Father of the Bride here is talking to the original Japanese actors, an obvious body double is added to the newly filmed scene, shot from behind so you can't tell it's someone else. I mean, sometimes they get super creative, like in this scene with Serizawa, where you can totally tell it's him since he has the eye patch. But who put all those tubes in the way? To be fair, in other scenes like when everyone is meeting and deciding what to do next, it's not all bad and significantly less distracting. Sometimes it really looks like the jerk is really there. Godzilla King of the Monsters is a fascinating film, and without it, the franchise may not have continued beyond an initial sequel. Because while Gojira's Counterattack or Godzilla Raids Again was released soon after the original, the next film in the franchise, King Kong vs. Godzilla, may have never happened without the success of the Americanized version. On the other hand, like many things that go through a cultural lens change, that American version is without a doubt a pale imitation of the original. Gone are the very clear and obvious references to real-life Japanese tragedies, and they've been replaced by an attempt to pass Godzilla off as a generic sci-fi monster, as was becoming popular in American cinemas at the time, with movies like Them, that one movie about giant radioactive ants. Another positive that came with the American version was a reassessment of the original film by Japanese critics, and contemporary reviews would continue to swing positively as the years went by. Ironically, while it seems American producers were trying to make a quick buck that would help kick off a plethora of B-movie monster flicks, it apparently had the opposite effect back in Japan. But unfortunately, this lesser version of the seminal Godzilla movie would be the only one available for international audiences until the 1954 original saw a worldwide release in 2004. Throughout the 1960s and 70s, Godzilla would change and evolve from his serious roots as a villainous metaphor for mankind's destructive nature into a heroic icon, with movies that would shift between serious and more silly tonal shifts. Godzilla clearly kicked off a kaiju boom, and while there were many imitators or attempts to cash in on the craze, Godzilla is the only one who would continue to come back for more over and over again. So many monsters would cross over or even star in their own films, but Godzilla would almost always appear to save the day. Many of these films would make their way to North America in some shape or form, usually with dubs or re-edits, but sometimes they would remove Godzilla's name entirely. Looking at you, Gigantus the Fire Monster. And hey, if you're interested in checking out Godzilla's origins for yourself, you can. You can find the first 15 films that make up the Showa era from 1954 to 1975 on the Criterion Channel app, along with other kaiju movies from the time period. Or, if you prefer physical media, Criterion released this beautiful collection of those first 15 Godzilla films, complete with gorgeous artwork and tons of bonus features. And with 1985's The Return of Godzilla, a semi-sequel / reboot to the original 1954 film, it almost makes sense that the American version, retitled Godzilla 1985, would also replicate what they did to the original, complete with our pal Cheaper by the Dozen, played by a returning Raymond Burr. Honestly, I'm surprised it took until 1998 for us to see a fully American-produced version of Godzilla, as directed by Roland Emmerich, starring Matthew Broderick, and forever tied in my brain with that song, Come With Me. There's no denying this movie is just plain awful. It was clearly trying to capitalize on the popularity of dinosaur films, but confusingly, they changed the design of Godzilla to originate from an iguana, which is why he resembles a lizard instead of a dinosaur in the finished product. And when the baby Godzillas pop up later in the film, tell me with a straight face that's not copying the raptor scene from Jurassic Park. The only good thing that came from this film, other than introducing others like me to the source material, is the Japanese response. 2004's Godzilla Final Wars was the last Japanese Godzilla film before he went into hibernation for over a decade, and they decided to send him off with a bang. This was an over-the-top action spectacle that features tons of past monsters. And guess who shows up just in time for a humiliating defeat? The 1998 American version, renamed to Zilla, since as director Ryuhei Kitamura put it, the American filmmakers took the god out of Godzilla. Ouch. But well deserved. But America wasn't quite done with trying to make Godzilla happen in the West, and in 2014, another film confusingly titled Godzilla would hit theaters to great financial and critical success. Before Godzilla, director Gareth Edwards wrote, directed, and acted as cinematographer for Monsters, a 2010 British horror film that was definitely impressive, especially considering its independent roots. At the time, it took a unique approach by focusing less on the creatures and more on the destruction left in their wake, leaving them mostly unseen throughout the film. Unfortunately, Edwards took a similar approach with his take on Godzilla, which left some audiences, present company included, wanting more from it. I mean, when I see a Godzilla film, I want to see lots of Godzilla. Go figure, right? Thanks in part to the movie's box office success, production company Legendary Pictures would kick off their own Monsterverse of connected films, as inspired by the Marvel Cinematic Universe. A few years later, Kong Skull Island, a super fun action adventure, would hit theaters with an end credits reference to not only Godzilla, but also Mothra, Rodan, and King Ghidorah. 2 more films have since been released to expand upon the mythology and to have Godzilla fight King Kong, with another installment releasing later in 2024 that will see Godzilla and Kong teaming up against another monster menace. Meanwhile, on the other side of the world, it seems the 2014 American Godzilla would inspire Japan to take their original version out of a 12-year retirement and give us Shin Godzilla, an amazing film that easily stands with some of the best entries of the franchise. Japan would follow up this entry with a trilogy of animated films, before releasing the latest live-action outing with Godzilla Minus One. This one feels like the perfect evolution of the 1954 original, as it manages to balance monster destruction, human drama, and social commentary in equal measure, while also creating a massively entertaining film at the same time. Needless to say, it's an amazing time to be a Godzilla fan, whether you prefer the Japanese films or the American ones, which thankfully have greatly improved since that 1998 original. When it's all said and done, there's no denying that watching giant monsters on a rampage is a fun piece of escapism. Whether it's a giant, atomic-breathing Godzilla or a threatening meat-eating T-Rex. But it's also important to remember why Godzilla was created in the first place. He's an artistic response to real-life devastation and destruction. And hey, a Godzilla film can still be entertaining, while helping us process certain things we're going through. It might even inspire us to discuss and learn about the past, in order to do better in our futures. And hey, isn't that the true power of a great film? But what do you think? Do you enjoy giant monster movies like Godzilla? Or would you prefer to watch something a little less destructive? Let me know down in the comments below, and until next time, hey Universal Pictures, those Jurassic World movies just kept getting worse, didn't they? I see there's another one in development. Maybe stop? How about you just stop? Have you tried stopping?
Yeah, but your
producers
so preoccupied with whether or not they didn't stop to think if they should.
Hey, hope you're having a super awesome day. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you so much, and I'll see you real soon.